Friends, let me tell you about a time and a time in my life when I was just graduating college. See, I went to a small liberal arts school called Oklahoma Baptist University in the middle of Oklahoma. And I had grown up working at our family farms, flower shops. We had rent houses. I was mowing lawns. I was working as a putt-putt manager, all these crazy, like, what? And I was doing these things. I worked a lot growing up, and I had a great time. I had a great childhood. My parents were amazing. I'm an only child, but I wanted to go travel. And in fact, my grandmother took me when I was I guess I was an 18-year-old. She took me to Europe, and no, I was 17. I remember she took me to Europe, and I got to have these great experiences, which is another story. But because she took me on that journey, I got to see the world a little bit, and is that wanderlust. I was like, oh my goodness, I want to go explore. I want to go see. So when I graduated from college, I went with a group of a college professor. We created a business called Global Options. And it was basically a business that we started an economics school. So we had a school component. We started a marketing consulting. We did some accounting training and accounting work, and we built this business as kind of a platform business to do a lot of good in Russia right after the walls of communism fell. So right after that, we were right there. We were 6 months after, and so our team, and it was me and a guy named Gary and Robert Morris, and we had Scott Toddy and Greg Long, and we had teachers, and we had some interns, and we had just a group of great people, but we went over to try to change the world. And that was the whole premise of it. And so, so very early on, and I'm going to show a little, some slides. Very early on, I had this mentality, and a couple of things that happened. One was a lesson that I learned that I kind of came up with my own little mantra. Let the world fund you to influence it. Let the world fund you to influence it, meaning you can use business as a platform for good, for impact. And I started practicing how to do that with my colleagues in Russia. And I went from Oklahoma to Russia, to Moscow in 1993. And I was there from 1993 to 95. It had an amazing impact on my life. So I'm going to share a couple of things. So I came up with another phrase, and I started saying this a lot because we were clueless. I was 21 years old, just to give you context. I started college early, graduated at a young age, and was living in Russia at 21. And we had this little phrase that we just use a lot, and it's, who says we can't? Who says we can't? Who's told us we can't do this? Now, a lot of it for me was early on, probably arrogance, a little cockiness, but that was just a key phrase that we kind of believed. And I think it's a really important one, because when you know who you really are, it's like, well, who says we can't do this? And so there wasn't a lot of prohibition at the time. I want to show you what I looked like then, okay? This is going to be funny, because you're going to look at me now with no hair, and I go, yeah, there we go. There's me. That's not the best image or picture, but that's the one I could find. And so that's me, obviously on the right. That's my almost fiance at the time, which is my wife now, Kelly, in the middle, and that's my mom on the other side. They came for a visit, and it was in the dead of winter, and so Tracy, just proving, I know you remember that I had hair, but I did have hair. For all of those who are wondering, that's not a wig or toupee. So that was a key part of my life. Well, but here's what's really interesting is we lived at, let's see if I can remember how to say it again, 9 Krasnopresnenskaya, so 9 Krasnopresnenskaya 4, right by Zapark, which is the park in Moscow, which is right downtown Moscow. And we lived in this 3-story flat. And we had the guys on one side and some girls on the other side, and the married couples were on the second floor. And on the first floor was a mafia group. an Armenian mafia group. And I can't wait to tell you that story. I have numerous mafia stories to tell, but that's not what I'm going to tell you today. Today, I'm going to just share with you my view from my room. And it was basically this. It was not the exact view, but over here, this is Stalin Tower. And Stalin Tower was built by Stalin as the tallest building at the time. And it was built by Stalin because he wanted the world to know that he was in charge. Now, every single night, I could see Stalin Tower, and it was just a really, really pretty and ominous view. And out of my window, I would have the window cracked because in Russia, the heating system was hot water through pipes. There was no variation. It was all just hot water. So it would get so hot inside the window. To do air conditioning, you would open your window to the freezing cold, and you'd regulate the freezing cold and the snow with the heat that came in the units. So I'd sit there with my window cracked, and I would have my guitar out, and I would be writing my journal, and I would be staring at Stalin Tower every single night. And I could see the upper half of it. And Stalin Tower has a bunch of gargoyles on it, and it's like a power play. Like, you'll never forget me at Stalin. And so I started this pondering sessions. I started studying things and looking, and it was just a really fascinating time. In fact, I'll never forget, one of the stories that I have is I was coming out of my flat one morning, and I was going to work, and I worked at the American Slavyanskaya Hotel, which is the Americom, and it was a business unit. And so what was really fascinating about it was I came out of my apartment, and I saw this guy, and he grabbed a speaker, and he had a speaker over his head, and he went to the trash dumpster, and he just dumped it, and he just threw it down. And I was like, what are you doing? And I remember watching him. I don't remember if I was with someone or by myself going to work, but I then looked, and another guy came, and then another guy, and then a lady came, and there was like a line of people with stereo speakers above their heads, and they would throw them down, and then they would kind of spit and then they'd walk around. And I asked the guy, like, "Что это? Как жизнь?" It's like, what's happening here? What is this? And basically, they said, these are listening devices that were in our apartment building. Now, the listening device, they said, was basically every apartment had a listening device. And the device looked like a little speaker, and it would play music at all times. You couldn't turn it off, but you could turn it down. And so what was happening in that was the ability for Big Brother or for the state to listen in. And I can tell you how many people I talked to, Russians, would tell us that they would find a special place in their home to whisper to one another so that they wouldn't be overheard. And you think, oh my goodness, this level of domination, this level of control to keep people in line didn't make them compelled to the government or engaged to the government. It made them fear the government or hate the government. And that's what happened. Over 70 years of that type of communistic oppression. And it was just fascinating to watch. And the liberation was this guy was taking a risk to go, I think communism is dead. I'm going to rip it out. But this was like a year later. It took him a year to do it. And then he threw it as a symbol of liberation and freedom. So I'll never forget that. It's like that was a big component. And I just, Bob Dowdy. Bob was one of our partners and was there as well. I just saw that you joined. Thanks for that, Bob. So we just had this amazing experience of watching what was like for 70 years of control over people. So I'm going to show you what I mean by that, and we'll get into some learnings that I had, some key learning. Basically, 70 years of control. Well, leaders define culture, and Stalin defined the culture. And he basically, leaders use influence to either empower or overpower. And so what I did, and I took that first year I was there, I took some classes from basically like a university, and I started doing some study on my own and reading on my own at night about the Soviet Union's view of World War II. And they were trying to protect themselves from the crazies in Europe, from Hitler, and then World War I, all of the things that they experienced. So Stalin used that, and he dominated his own people. He killed more people than Hitler did. He killed and had his own people killed in different areas, and lots of different genocide. And so he used his influence and his power to overpower. And every night I would stare at Stalin Tower. I would read about Stalin or history. I would write in my journal, or I would play my guitar, or I'd hang out with friends. But after I was finished hanging out, I would go in my room and have this contemplation time. And I started playing with the concepts of influence. I started playing with these concepts that eventually became the support challenge matrix, for those of you who are really interested and who know the GiANT world and GiANT tools. So it comes down like this. I wrote a book. The first book I wrote was called Leadership is Dead, 7 ways basically of how influence is reviving leadership, if you understand what influence is. So what I did here is I basically started this flow, and this was pre making it simpler, but this was in my first book, which became Making Your Leadership Come Alive. That basically leadership is about leaders. Leaders have influence. Influence is power. So leaders have power. They have the choice to either empower or overpower. That's what I was watching. I was watching the ramifications of 70 years of overpowering people and what it did. So it's all based on the intent of the leader. That overpowering would lead to either manipulation, as they were for themselves, and ultimately domination, which was a transactional self-pursuit. It brought negative or no influence because it's all fear-based, and it was fear motivation to get people to do what you want. And what I realized was the Stalin was really creating a culture of abdication and a culture of compliance, not a culture of engagement. And I think for any of us that were over there at that period of time, we watched this people group that basically set underneath this dominating, overpowering leadership. And we watched what they were trying to do. They were trying to figure out how to live. They were trying to figure out, like, I have freedom now. How do I make money? Can I take out the listening device? How do I relate? What's my view to America? Because they had been controlled for so long. They had been honestly enslaved. That was the perception. That was the feel. That's what many of them told us and told me. And now they had freedom because they were no longer overpowered. They had a chance for empowerment, to be empowered to do something, but they didn't have a history. They didn't have a lot of examples. So it was clunky. It was really, really difficult. I'll never forget my first year teaching Russian students. I was teaching them basically Snicker bars and Cokes. And we would just use the very, very basics because they didn't have a construct for capitalism above that. And so we had to start at that level. So great leaders, if leaders define culture, if you're a great leader, then you're someone who understands that you have power through your influence, and you choose to empower people, which means you're serving them, and your intent, your agenda is to serve, not to manipulate. Therefore, you become a liberating leader. You have a relational dynamic. You're self-fulfilled because you're focused on helping others. You're fighting for the highest possible good of other people. And when you give yourself away there for that purpose and build relationships before opportunities, truly giving yourself away, you come alive, they come alive, and they are empowered. Now, that was complicated, and there's a lot in there, and you got to go, okay, what does that mean? Let's get into it. So we took this. So when I moved to London years later, Steve Cockram and Steve knew obviously all my early writing, and so we took some of my early content, and Steve then helped me fill in the other side of it, because what I did is I took this with Stalin that led to this understanding of how influence works, to this, which is so much more simple. So I had the right side figured out, liberate and dominate, but the left side was the other components to go, okay, so we put it in an XY matrix, we put it in a high support, low support, high challenge, low challenge, and all of a sudden this, for the most part, I mean, there's other things in here. There's the influence model, there's other tools, but this became this to go, really, what happened? Stalin brought high challenge and low support. He created a culture of fear and manipulation and dominated people. Did you realize that in World War II, one of the reasons that they had such a hard time with Germany in the very beginning is because Stalin assassinated, he killed all of the top level military leaders because he was afraid that one of them would rise up and try a coup to take him over. So he decided to have thousands of military leaders killed, which affected their ability to keep their land, and they almost lost it to Germany in World War II. But this dominating culture created compliance, and it actually didn't cause people to feel empowered or have opportunity. It did the opposite. It caused those people to be apathetic and have low expectation. So guess what they did? What we experienced was Russians basically were like, just save your life. Do enough just to keep your life, keep your food. If you can just do enough for survival. And so they learn to adapt and exist in a dominating culture. Now, apply that to your current team. Apply that to your current family. Apply that to the way that you live. Apply that to our country or countries that we're in. There are leaders, and the best leaders define a culture, and they create a culture of empowerment and opportunity. They learn how to calibrate high support and high challenge. They turn people green because that culture is an atmosphere, and in that atmosphere, there's health. People can thrive. It's challenging, but it's also supportive. And if you take what happened in the Soviet Union, it was high challenge and low support. It was lighting fire under people to do what the government wanted to do. And I know I'm oversimplifying here, but I'm giving you the general construct of what this person did to keep and maintain control and power. Now, I would make the case that Putin is doing similar things with more civility. He's using certain tactics in a appearance of liberation, but it's still domination for my friends and people I've talked to, and just what you see and what you read. It's high challenge and low support, and I know I can get in trouble with some of you on that who might disagree on that. But what I'm suggesting is that we have a responsibility for our influence. We have a responsibility for our power. Are we choosing to empower people or overpower people? And if we understand those dynamics, if we understand that it's our intent, if our intent is for ourselves, it will come across as overpowering because we're probably doing that to manipulate people, to keep them under our thumb or keep them regulated or controlled, versus serving people and empowering leads to giving yourself away, and it leads to positive impact that fuels you and other people and makes them want to work with you, not have to work with you. So that is today is not as much of a unreal story, meaning that I'm telling you about Russia and this was Stalin Tower and where I lived. It's a warm-up story to tell you kind of why some of the tools have come about, to give you a real specific of kind of why storytelling is so important. I'm going to be sharing stories with you on getting hit by a drunk driver in a hurricane. I'm going to tell stories of climbing mountains. I'm going to tell stories of mafia. I'm going to tell stories of a client being assassinated, some crazy things that I've experienced and some of you have been a part of. As I'm seeing, Bob Dowdy, I will definitely be talking about you in one of the stories. So that's some of the fun. I might even throw a Kenyan story in for you, Jimmy. So, but the point is this: life is meant to be lived to the full. And when we're looking for opportunities to serve, and when we stretch ourselves and we go, you know what, I'm in it to win it. Let's go. Then what happens is that you gain perspective, you gain insight, if you're willing to be curious. And when you're willing to be curious, a lot of fun can happen. So